This is not a story. This is a warning. Across America, there are places where the nightmares never end, and the truth is buried with the dead. Tonight, we open another door. Welcome to the American Nightmare.
This is KTXR Texarkana broadcasting an important bulletin. Residents are again urged to remain indoors after dark unless absolutely necessary. Authorities continue to investigate the latest in a series of brutal attacks being called the Moonlight Murders. Police remind citizens that parking on rural roads, lovers' lanes, or isolated areas is strongly discouraged until further notice. A curfew is recommended for all children and young adults. Anyone seeing a suspicious person in dark clothing, well over 6 feet tall, possibly wearing a hood or mask, is urged to contact the sheriff's office immediately. Once again, for your safety, stay indoors, keep your doors locked, and do not travel alone at night until further notice.
Imagine hearing that in your living room. No internet. No breaking news alerts on your phone. Just a box in the corner, glowing faintly, telling you that somewhere out there, someone is hunting people who look a lot like you. In the spring of 1946, the town of Texarkana, straddling the Texas-Arkansas border, learned what it sounded like when fear had a voice. It crackled through radios. It whispered in church pews. It hissed off the front pages of newspapers as headlines screamed about a faceless figure they began to call the Phantom. A man with no clear name, no clear face, only a shape, seen in the flash of headlights at the edge of a field, or in that last second just before the gun went off. For weeks, the attacks came like a rhythm only the killer understood. A couple parked on a quiet back road. A car left half off the shoulder, driver's door hanging open. A farmhouse with the lights still on at dawn, but no movement inside. In Texarkana, people stopped walking home after the late shift. Store owners closed early. Hardware shops ran low on padlocks and chains, as if metal alone could keep the darkness out. Men who hadn't carried a gun since the war loaded their pistols and leaned them by the door. Women closed curtains early, watching their own reflections in the glass, and wondering if something on the other side was watching back. You see, town legends don't start as stories. They start as nights, as drives home that never finish, as holes in the silence where a familiar voice used to be. The Phantom didn't need a calling card. Texarkana was his calling card. He hunted in the empty spaces between streetlights and porch lamps, on roads with no names, where the only witnesses were trees and telephone poles. The newspapers told one story. The police reports told another. And then there were the pages that never made either. The ones that stayed buried in a box, under dust, tape, and a warning written in someone's shaking hand. Tonight, we're going to open that box. We'll walk you through the attacks that made national headlines, and one that didn't. An unreported killing that was quietly filed away, stamped, and forgotten, at least officially. Because some deaths don't vanish. They hang in the air. They rattle chains on old barn doors. They lean against fence posts on sleepless nights. They turn the crunch of gravel behind you into something you can feel in your teeth. As you listen, wherever you are right now, ask yourself a question. If you lived in Texarkana in 1946, with the roads empty, the radio begging you to stay inside, and a dirty, nameless figure drifting through the fields outside of town, would you have gone out after dark? Would you have parked on a lonely road under the moon with someone you loved? Would you have heard that footstep on gravel behind your car and lived long enough to talk about it? This is not just a ghost story. This is a reconstruction of fear, stitched together from case files, news clippings, and memories people tried their whole lives to forget. This is American Nightmare, Texarkana Phantom Moonlight Murders, and our story begins on a quiet road with two young people who thought the darkness belonged to them. The night of February 22nd, 1946, felt like the kind of cool Texas evening meant for forgetting life's troubles. The war was over, soldiers were returning home, and the people of Texarkana were trying to step back into ordinary days. Movie theaters were filling again, dance halls had music again. Couples were driving the long back roads just to feel the future breathing down their necks. Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry were one of those couples. They had finished a picture show downtown and were heading north, letting the conversation roll softly between them. Jimmy was one of those quiet young men who always seemed caught between gentleness and nerves. Mary had the kind of smile that could make a man feel braver than he really was. They were talking about nothing important: her work, his new job, the rising price of beef, the kind of passing details young couples use to pretend the world is completely safe. Just before midnight, they pulled off Richmond Road onto a narrow dirt turnout shaded by tall pine trees. A lover's lane, unofficial but understood. The moon was bright enough to etch shadows into the ground like claw marks. A soft breeze rustled the needles overhead, and for a few minutes the world felt distant and forgiving. Mary leaned over, tracing shapes in the fogged window. Jimmy adjusted the radio dial until a slow jazz tune settled into the speakers. They weren't making out, weren't doing anything reckless. They were just being young, being alive. But the nights in Texarkana in 1946 had already begun to shift, though no one knew it yet. Mary was the first to feel it. A pressure, a presence, like someone watching through the trees. She kept looking at the rearview mirror, then at the dark road behind them. "Jimmy, did you see that?" "See what?" he asked, laughing softly. "I don't know. Something behind us." Jimmy smiled, but it didn't last long. A sharp thud hit the back of the car, not loud but solid, deliberate. Jimmy turned in his seat. No headlights behind them, no car pulling in, just darkness. and the sense that something was standing still, waiting to be noticed. Mary reached over and grabbed Jimmy's arm, her voice small, tight. "Please, let's go. I don't like this." Jimmy took a breath, opened his door. "Jimmy, don't." He stepped out slowly, expecting to see a prankster, maybe another couple messing around. But the moment his feet hit the dirt, the forest seemed to swallow sound itself. Even the wind died. "Hello," he called. A figure stepped out from behind a tree, dirty, bent, face covered with something stained and crooked. Not a mask, not fabric, but some kind of filthy cloth stretched tight across his skull. His clothes looked wet, but not from rain. His boots were thick with mud, the wrong color for this part of town. Jimmy froze. Then the figure stepped closer, one slow, deliberate pace. "Buddy, we don't want any trouble," Jimmy said, voice shaking. Mary leaned across the front seat and screamed, "Jimmy, get in!" He didn't get the chance. The phantom surged forward with a speed that didn't match the way he moved. He swung a dented metal flashlight across Jimmy's face, dropping him instantly, the sound like a hammer hitting bone. Mary screamed and scrambled out the passenger door, running barefoot into the night. The grass sliced her feet as she sprinted toward the road. Her breath came in sharp gasps. Her heart hammered so violently she thought it might burst. Behind her she heard footsteps. Not running, not even walking normally, but jerking in uneven bursts, like something half crawling, half charging, gaining ground far too quickly. Mary didn't dare look back. She reached the road, slipped, fell into the ditch and clawed at the weeds to hide herself. She didn't pray. She didn't have time. All she could do was brace for whatever was coming. The phantom appeared at the top of the ditch. The moon caught his face, or where his face should have been. Dirty cloth, stained in patches, pulled tight across bone. No eyes visible, yet Mary felt him looking directly at her. He climbed down after her. Mary screamed. The phantom's hand grabbed her by the hair, his grip cold, strong, almost inhumanly steady. He hit her once, hard, not to kill, but to stop her from screaming again. Then, headlights appeared at the far end of the road. A car, an actual car. The phantom froze, head twisting toward the lights with a stiff, unnatural motion. His breathing sounded wet, labored. Mary felt his grip tighten, then release. He backed away slowly, blending into the darkness like a figure sinking into water, absorbed by the tree line in seconds. The approaching car slowed, then stopped. The driver saw Mary crawling onto the road, bleeding, shaking uncontrollably. He pulled over, ran to her, shouting for help. Minutes later, Sheriff Walter Culpepper arrived. A tired-eyed, steady man who had already seen enough horror in his life to know when something was different, when something was wrong. Jimmy was barely conscious, blood pooling under his cheek, skull fractured, face bruised almost beyond recognition. Mary couldn't stand. She trembled violently, unable to describe what she'd seen except to repeat, "He wasn't human. He wasn't human. He wasn't human. Sheriff Culpepper knelt beside her, trying to get any detail he could. But Mary's eyes kept drifting to the trees, as if she expected the phantom to return. Later, Culpepper would walk around the car, studying the shattered window, the footprints, and something else, something that made his stomach tighten. A streak on the door, mud, but not from this road, not from anywhere near here. Instead, it matched a type of soil found on farmland miles east of Texarkana. Culpepper wrote it down, circled it twice. Because 2 nights earlier, on a quiet farm well outside town, a man and his grown son had been found dead inside a barn. Beaten, not shot, not robbed, just left there, broken. Sheriff Culpepper had been ordered to keep it quiet. No newspapers, no public statements. They didn't want panic. Now, standing over Jimmy's shattered window, looking at the mud smeared across the car door, Culpepper realized the truth. The phantom had already killed before Jimmy and Mary ever reached that road. Texarkana had no idea what was about to walk out of the dark. By morning, the story of Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry was already spreading, long before any newspaper ink touched paper. People didn't say attempted murder. They said, "Did you hear about that thing on Richmond Road?" They didn't say assailant. They said something that wasn't right. Sheriff Walter Culpepper spent the early hours of February 23rd at the hospital, standing at the foot of 2 beds that told him more about Texarkana's future than any radio bulletin ever would. Jimmy lay wrapped in bandages, head swollen, drifting in and out of consciousness. Mary sat in a separate room, clutching a paper cup of water like it might float her out of all this. Culpepper asked her to describe what she'd seen, softly, patiently. She tried, but the words didn't come out like a police statement. They came out like a memory she wanted to burn.
Everybody always asks me if he looked like a man in a mask. They don't understand. I've seen men in masks. Halloween, the war, people hiding their faces. This wasn't like that. It wasn't just something he was wearing. It was filthy, tight, like it had grown onto him. I remember the smell more than anything. Damp cloth, dirt, and something sour, like clothes left in a well too long. I didn't see eyes. I felt eyes. I knew he was looking at me, but there was nothing there I could point to. No features. Just that dirty cloth pulled across where a face should have been. When he pulled me into that ditch, his breathing was wrong, like he was trying to remember how, like he hadn't done it in a while. People say he spared me because of the car that came. Maybe. But when those headlights hit the road, I felt his hand tighten first, like he didn't want to let go, like he was deciding. And I'll tell you something Sheriff Culpepper wrote down, but nobody printed. His clothes were wet, not from rain, from the knees down, like he'd been walking through flooded fields or standing in water. And the mud on his boots, that wasn't city dirt. That was farm dirt, local farm dirt.
When word of Mary's description began to leak, not officially, but through the cracks that all towns have, the phantom stopped being a rumor and started becoming a shape. A dirty shape, a wet one, something that didn't move right and didn't belong on paved streets. Within weeks, Texarkana changed. Storefronts closed earlier. Churches added prayer for protection to their services. Men who'd left their rifles in closets since the war brought them back to the front room. And on the back roads, the places where young people parked to whisper their futures into each other's ears, engines were quieter, cars thinned out. But not all of them. Some people hear a warning and stay inside. Some hear it and think, it won't be me. On the night of March 24th, 1946, it was Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore who stayed out. They parked off an isolated lane just outside town. Neighbors would later report hearing a car around 1 a.m. Then silence. Then nothing at all, until sunrise. Sheriff Culpepper arrived to a scene nobody wants to see once, let alone remember for the rest of their life. The car sat half on, half off the rutted lane. Inside, Richard Griffin was slumped between the front seats, head bowed, as if in prayer. But there was no praying here. He'd been shot in the head. Polly Ann's body was in the back seat. The arrangement felt wrong, like someone had taken the time to place them, not just leave them. There were drag marks in the dirt, footprints circling the vehicle, and mud again, smeared on the car door at knee height. Same strange soil, same ghost trail leading back toward the outskirts, toward fields and old farm plots. Culpepper didn't say, "We have a serial killer." Those weren't the words men like him used then. He said, "He's back." And for the first time he meant, still here. The newspapers exploded. Local reporter Frank Daly started filing stories as fast as the presses could run. Headlines like, "Couple found slain in parked car," "Moonlight killer strikes again." In his later notes, Daly wrote, "You could feel it get in people's bones. Men were buying extra locks and ammunition. Women were keeping lamps on in the bedroom all night. The streets at dusk looked like a theater right after the credits. Everybody going home faster than they needed to. Rumors like rot spread faster than facts. Some swore they'd seen a man walking along the gravel shoulders of country roads, clothes streaked with mud, head bowed under some filthy covering. Others claimed they saw a shape standing in a field, not moving at all, until they blinked, and it was suddenly closer. Culpepper chased every lead. He set up roadblocks, interviewed soldiers, drifters, farmhands, anyone who'd been near those back roads. But the dirt on the car doors, the angle of the bodies, the placement of bullets, they all whispered the same thing. This man doesn't rush. He doesn't panic. He takes his time. On the night of April 13th, 1946, the Phantom decided time wasn't enough. He wanted distance, too. 17-year-old Betty Jo Booker was a saxophonist, playing a gig with her band at the local VFW. Smart, bright, not the kind of girl who made a habit of trouble. Her friend Paul Martin, 15, came to pick her up after the show. They left together a little after 1:30 in the morning. They never made it home. By sunrise, Paul's body was found on the side of North Park Road. He'd been shot 4 times, in the nose, ribs, hand, and back of the neck. The pattern suggested someone who knew how a body folds, where it collapses. Betty Jo wasn't with him. They found her later 2 miles away, partially hidden among the trees off another road. Shot twice. Her body posed, as if set down with cruel intention. Sheriff Culpepper stared at the scene, feeling the noose of the town's fear tightening around his own throat. He knew the roads, knew the distances. It was as if the Phantom had decided the car wasn't enough anymore. He wanted the whole countryside. And then there was the matter of the instrument. Betty's saxophone was missing. Days later, it turned up in some brush near where she'd been found, as if the Phantom had carried it, then discarded it like a souvenir he didn't need, or like a message. I can take what you love and scatter it wherever I please. By late April, Texarkana wasn't a town anymore. It was a pressure cooker. Gunshots in the night were no longer alarming. They were expected. Men firing at shadows in their yard. Women screaming at silhouettes that turned out to be trees in the wind. Patrol cars rolled through neighborhoods with windows cracked, listening. Frank Daly described it like this: "You could stand in the middle of downtown at 9 o'clock and hear nothing but your own footsteps and the occasional dog bark. It felt like the whole town was holding its breath, waiting to see whose name would be printed next." The Phantom had become a story kids whispered about under blankets. He'd become a presence behind thin curtains. He'd become the reason mothers closed their doors tighter and fathers let their fingers rest a little longer on the triggers of their rifles. But for Sheriff Walter Culpepper, it was the dirt that kept him awake. That strange soil on the boots, on the car doors, tracked near the bodies. It wasn't just from the roads where the killings happened. It matched that quiet farm outside town, the one with the barn, the one with a case file stamped and buried before anyone ever heard the phrase "Phantom Killer." Culpepper requested to reopen the investigation into that farm. He was denied. "Focus on the public cases," he was told, "the ones people know about." But in his head, the Phantom wasn't 4 separate headlines. He was a single figure, walking a long route through Texarkana's darkest corners, starting somewhere nobody wanted to talk about. In May, the Phantom would bring his terror right to someone's front porch. He would shoot a man through his own window. He would turn a quiet farmhouse into a killing floor while the radio played in the other room. And one woman, Katie Starks, would live long enough to describe what it feels like when the Phantom comes not to your car, not to your lover's lane spot, but to your home. where you thought you were safe. Her testimony would finally convince Sheriff Culpepper that the killings everyone knew about, and the one nobody did, were pieces of the same nightmare. And by then, it would already be too late. Because the phantom had already walked through the barn at the edge of town. He had already stood in its doorway, wet boots on old wood, looking at two men who never made the paper. The town was terrified of the attacks in the headlines. They hadn't even heard the worst story yet. That one was still sealed in a box, waiting. By early May, Texarkana was a different town than the one that began to spring. People who once slept with windows open now nailed them shut. Front porches that used to glow with evening conversation now sat dark and empty. And the roads felt abandoned, like the whole countryside was holding its breath. Some towns survive fear. Texarkana was learning to live inside it. Sheriff Walter Culpepper barely went home anymore. He slept in his office, boots on, jacket draped across his chest, a cigarette burning down to ash between two fingers while he stared at maps and reports until dawn. The phantom's pattern was clear enough to be terrifying. A Lover's Lane attack, a Lover's Lane double murder, a second double murder, escalation in distance, escalation in brutality. But Culpepper knew what many didn't. The pattern didn't start on a Lover's Lane. It started on a farm, and he feared it might end in someone's home. Just after 9 p.m. on an ordinary Friday night, Virgil and Katie Starks settled into their quiet farmhouse off Highway 67. Virgil sat in his armchair in the front room, reading his newspaper by a lamp. Katie was in the bedroom, lying across the bed in her robe, listening to the radio hum a soft tune. The house wasn't isolated, but not close enough for anyone to hear a gunshot through the walls. The fields out back stretched far, the nearest neighbor a long walk across dark land. At 9:05 p.m., Katie heard glass shatter. She thought Virgil had dropped something. Maybe the cat knocked over a lamp. She called his name. No answer. The second shot came before she reached the doorway. Katie froze when she saw him. Virgil slumped in the chair, head tilted back, blood spreading down his collar. The window behind the chair was shattered inward, tiny shards glittering on the floor. Someone had shot him through the window, twice, from outside. Katie turned to run, and the third shot hit her in the face. The bullet tore through her cheek and exited near her ear. She collapsed, stunned, as the phantom began circling the house, boots crunching across broken glass and gravel. Katie forced herself up, blood soaking her robe, vision swimming. She ran into the hallway. Another shot ripped through the kitchen window and struck her again in the lower jaw. Yet she didn't stop, didn't give him what he wanted. She crawled toward the phone, hands shaking violently, blood dripping onto the receiver. She dialed. The operator picked up. Then Katie heard something else, something far worse than gunfire. A footstep inside the house. The phantom had broken in. Katie dropped the phone and staggered into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. She shoved a dresser against it just as a hand, dirty, wet, streaked with the same filthy cloth she'd read about in the papers, pushed through the crack. She screamed, threw herself out the back window, cutting her legs open on the frame, tumbling into the yard. Bleeding, barely standing, she stumbled across the road toward her sister's house. Neighbors found her collapsed in their driveway, soaked in blood, but alive. Virgil was gone. Katie had survived one of the most brutal attacks Texarkana would ever know. And later, when sheriff's deputies asked her what she saw, Katie described something that chilled Culpepper to the core.
He didn't run like a person. It was really weird. Every time he moved, it was like something jolting through him. Never seen anything like that in all my years. I saw his hands through the door crack. And I swear to God those hands weren't clean. They had mud on them. Wet mud. He carried it in the house with him. And the smell, I'll never forget it. Same as that poor girl Mary said. It smelled like old water, damp clothes, like he'd walked straight out of a swamp.
That was it. That was the missing piece. Mary Larry's testimony. The farmers' deaths that never hit the paper. The dirt on Griffin's door. The dirt near Betty Jo. The wet clothing. The footsteps that never sounded right. Sheriff Culpepper knew exactly where he had to go next. He grabbed his keys, didn't wait for backup, and drove toward the outskirts, toward the faded farmland where the soil matched every crime scene, toward the place he'd been told not to revisit, toward the barn. The Henderson farm had been quiet for years. Walter Henderson, elderly, reclusive, lived out there with his younger brother, Cliff, working what little land they had left. They weren't social. They didn't come into town much. They didn't cause trouble. Which made the call Culpepper received 2 months earlier all the more chilling. When he'd first found them back in February, he stood in that barn doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. Walter Henderson lay near the stalls, head crushed, body twisted as if he'd been thrown. Cliff was farther in, one hand still gripping the handle of a pitchfork, throat bruised, skull caved in. No gunshots, no robbery. No footprints except one set, deep, uneven, dragging in places. A set of footprints that led right up to the bodies, and then back out, toward the fields behind the barn. Culpepper had wanted to alert the public, wanted to warn people. But the city council insisted it was an isolated case. Just farm trouble, they said. Even back then, Culpepper had written one detail carefully in his notes. Boot prints wet, soil disturbed, victim's dog missing, barn smells of standing water though no rain. But now, after hearing Katie Starks describe the same smell, the same dirt, Culpepper felt that old dread return like a cold breath down his neck. He pulled up to the Henderson barn after midnight. The moon was weak, a thin sliver behind clouds. The barn door hung half open, swaying lightly in the wind. Inside, the air felt stale, wrong. He stepped in with his flashlight, the beam slicing through dust and old cobwebs. The bloodstains were still on the floor, dried, dark, soaked into the wood. But something else was there now. Fresh footprints, wet, dragging, leading toward the back of the barn. Culpepper followed them slowly, breath tight in his chest. Then his light hit something in the doorway, a shape, tall, bent, covered in dirty, wet cloth that clung to the skull-like contours of its head. The phantom. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, blocking the exit, breathing raggedly behind the filthy mask. Culpepper raised his gun, hands shaking. "Don't take another step." The phantom didn't step. He slid crookedly out of the beam, the darkness swallowing him like he'd been waiting for it. Culpepper backed up, heart hammering. He moved to the side door, stumbled into the yard, and swung his light across the fields. Nothing. Only tall grass swaying faintly, and the wet impression of footprints leading into the night. This was the truth, the one Texarkana never heard. The phantom didn't vanish after the Starks' attack. He didn't stop because the papers stopped printing. He walked into the fields, into the farmlands, into the places where the roads don't go. And he kept walking. Texarkana healed on paper. The headlines faded. Lives went on. But if you drive far enough out of town, past the last streetlight, past the quiet roads where couples once parked, you'll reach the remains of that barn. Some nights, you can still smell damp cloth, still hear footsteps that don't sound right, still see something standing crooked in the moonlight. And if you blink, you might see it again. Dirty, bent, listening. Thank you for joining us this evening. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, be sure to subscribe to American Nightmare, hit the like button, and hype the video. Next week, we will be taking a journey to Centralia, Pennsylvania, a place long forgotten and abandoned since the 80s. As far as we know, not a single soul still resides there. Tune in next Saturday, same time, same channel, when two researchers find out that uninhabited may not be completely true, only on American Nightmare.